Hi folks, welcome to the Tech Chap. This is my in-depth review of the iPhone 6 Plus. I'll be doing a separate video review for the iPhone 6 and also a separate comparison video for the 6 and the 6 Plus to test that a bit more thoroughly. So this is the iPhone 6 Plus. I have to be very careful how I handle this. It's very expensive and very slippery. But this is a 64GB model, which is the one I'd actually recommend to you. And at £700, actually $699. It's the most expensive phone I've ever bought to review. I would recommend the 64GB one. 16 is just not big enough. With iOS updates, apps getting bigger, and filming in up to 1080p, 60 on the back, you're going to be taking up that space very quickly. So go for the 64. It's very expensive, but let's find out maybe if it's worth it, and perhaps if you should buy it. So this is going to be just about the 6 Plus. As I say, we'll be looking at the other phones and a comparison between them, a bit more detail in a different video. But for now, let's delve right into this. Now on the front we have this big, beautiful 1080p screen, and that's all housed within a aluminium casing. One of the first things you're going to notice is, as soon as you turn this on, is that you can now do this, horizontal mode. How useful this is on the home screen is debatable, but it actually, as we'll come onto later, does have a few little perks within certain applications like mails and messages. It sort of gives you a split screen view, offering not quite multitasking, but a bit of a benefit for the extra screen real estate. So if we keep looking around, we've got the Touch ID here, which is still fantastic and still the best fingerprint reader on any device, and coming from Samsung phones, including the Note 4 and the S5, this is a step up. The fingerprint reader is so much more reliable here, and even I guarantee you right now this will work first time. But I'm sure you've probably used an iPhone before with Touch ID, so you know how well that works. On the right hand side we have the power button and a nano SIM card slot. On the left we have volume up, volume down, and we have the toggle button for the silent mode on and off, and also I believe the auto rotate on and off if you change that in the options. So that's pretty simple on the sides. On the bottom we have the 3.5mm jack for your headphones, the microphone that is used to pick up your voice when you're talking, and the typical lightning connector here. And also we have the speaker grill here. We'll talk about the speaker in a little bit more detail later, but what I will say right now is that although it produces actually pretty good sound, and it's quite bassy, quite punchy, but the placement isn't optimal. It's just one of those things that you're going to accidentally cover up quite a lot, I'm afraid. So it's not ideal, but it's all pretty good, and it's all pretty standard. On the back we have the 8MP iSight camera with dual LED flash. One of the things that a lot of people have been talking about is that the camera is not flush with the device. I'm not sure if that's coming out particularly well. So it does stick out. You can sort of feel it. If you're holding it in your hand, you sort of want to think you've got a bit of dirt on it. You want to pick it off or something. But we'll talk about the camera later. It's an exceptional camera, but it is just one of those small design things that you sort of takes away from the overall aesthetic of the phone. It just doesn't quite look complete, but it's a minor issue and one that can be covered by a case essentially. So let's talk a bit more about the design of it. I love the front. It still has a fairly chunky top and bottom bezel, but I let that go because the bottom does house the excellent Touch ID. Perhaps it would be nice to have stereo speakers akin to maybe the Z3, the Sony phone, but it's one of those things that Apple isn't really addressing. They're making the phone thinner. They're improving in other ways, but it would be nice if we could reduce these bezels a bit. It does make the phone quite a bit bigger than it needs to be, especially if we perhaps compare this to the LG G3, which has the same screen size but is a significantly smaller device. One thing I do quite like, and I notice, is that the glass sort of overflows a little bit on the edge, and it just gives you this really smooth feeling to it, and it just feels really nice in the hand. And if you're swiping in from the side or you feel it, it drops off just a little bit, and it gives it a really nice impression, really nice glass smooth feeling. And it's just one of those things that adds to the pleasure of using it essentially. The back I'm not quite so keen on. The protruding camera, just the overall design of it, I'm not quite so fond of. I think the iPhone 4 and 5 series looks a little bit nicer, but this is all just cosmetic, and if you're going to put a case on it, which you really should, then you're not going to really see it anyway. So it doesn't really matter perhaps that the back isn't quite as nice as you like. It's still incredibly thin. The front, which is the main thing you're going to be seeing and using, is gorgeous. It's just a shame those bezels are still a bit big, but it's not too bad. So since we're talking about design, well, let's just have a look how this compares to the iPhone 6 and also the iPad Air 2, just in terms of size. So if I place the iPhone 6 Plus in the middle and the iPhone 6 on the left and the iPad Air 2 on the right. So you can see here that it's definitely still a phone. It's not in tablet territory, we've still got a lot of extra space here, and these two don't look that dissimilar, perhaps if you put it next to the iPad. Now, these are all Apple's latest devices, so it makes sense that they're all pretty similar in terms of design. But I just wanted to give you a quick look at what the size difference is, and to prove perhaps that although some say this is sort of in phablet territory, it's too big for a phone, it's not that much bigger than the 6. I mean, in terms of holding it, it does feel quite substantially larger, but for screen size and overall device size, it's definitely not a tablet. That's what I'm saying. One thing that does come to mind putting these together is that although I don't have an iPad mini, I would say that there probably isn't a great deal of need for one if you have an iPhone 6 Plus. This screen's so nice, it's so big that the iPad mini just isn't required anymore. I still think there's a case for the iPad Air. It's significantly bigger. You're going to want to share movies and things with this, but iPad mini, if you have the iPhone 6 Plus, I would probably say isn't worth it. It's maybe still if you have a iPhone 6 regular, but that's up to you completely. So I just wanted to show you guys how it all ranks up, and if we perhaps take a bit of a closer look at the 6 and 6 Plus side by side, I will be doing a full review of the two of them together, a proper comparison review. So this is just a quick little look at the both of them, but they're not too dissimilar. Although in the hand, I will say that they do feel quite different. This is quite a lot more comfortable to hold and a single hand device. This is definitely a two-handed device. So perhaps flat, they don't look that much different. In use, holding them, this is a lot bigger and you will notice it. Now, a lot of people will ask, is it too big? And I think that's a bit of a silly question. You will opt for the Plus because you want that bigger screen. That's the main selling point, really. So I suppose the point would be, as I similarly discussed with the Note 4, is how far does Apple go to mitigate the bigger overall footprint of the phone with a larger screen? And the answer is pretty much not at all. It doesn't really do much to reduce the overall size of the phone to compensate for the bigger screen. It's still heavy, 172 grams. Bezels remain the same as the 6. It's just fundamentally a bigger iPhone. It's just scaled up. So I suppose it loses some points for not making a larger screen phone more accessible and more ergonomic than just simply scaling it up. But at the same time, a big phone is going to be big. It's what you're expecting. It's what you're going to be buying it for. So this is definitely a two-handed device. One, because your finger thumb won't reach all the way across the screen. And the other because it's just so damn expensive and very slippery. You'll be scared to use it just with one hand. To mitigate the reachability issue slightly, there is a zoomed mode. If I go into the settings and then display, there is a view called zoomed mode, which doesn't make a great deal of difference. As you can see, it just sort of makes the app icons a bit bigger, but what I suppose that might do is, since there's less space between them, make it a little bit more easy to press the icon you want from a distance. It's a small reachability fix, I suppose. It's not a huge difference, as you can see, so that'll be up to you whether you want to use that. Now, one thing I will say is if you keep it in the zoomed mode, you actually lose the ability to have the split view in certain apps. If we keep it in standard for now, I'll show you what I mean by that. If I go to my mail, this is a normal email list, as you can see. If I rotate it horizontally and we're in landscape, we now get this split view. We get the email content on the right and we get the email list on the left. That's pretty useful, and actually that works the same in a few different apps, including messages. If I go here, so you'll see messages on the left and content on the right. Now, if I go back to settings and we set it to zoomed mode, like this, and set it, it'll go black for a second while it does that. So we're in zoom mode now, that's fine, that's great. But then you'll see that we lose that split view. We're now all full size. Now, you may want that, you may prefer that. Perhaps if your eyesight's not brilliant, or you just want the main content to be there, you don't want to be messing around with split view. That's something that you're going to have to think about. But you're losing a bit of the functionality. You don't even get the home screen going horizontal anymore. So that's sort of one of the bit of a selling points of the iPhone 6 Plus, that it's a bit more two-handed, landscape use for gaming, for videos and things. And obviously all that will still work, but you're losing just a bit of that extra functionality that you were getting with some of the Apple apps. So personally, it only makes a tiny difference to the app icons. So I would opt to keep it in standard mode. As a simple fix for the bigger screen size, if you do think it's too big and you are struggling to reach the top, well, perhaps just put the most important apps at the bottom. If you put your messages and your photos and your bits and pieces towards the bottom, then you're always going to be holding it like this, so you can access perhaps the first 3 rows, maybe the fourth row quite easily. So I suggest doing that if you are struggling with the extra size of it. Now the display on this is awesome. It's obviously Apple factory calibrated, so it's going to be good. There were never any problems with this. There were no light bleed issues. It's nice and bright, up to about 550 nits. Color accuracy is natural but vibrant. It's a brilliant screen, and for the first time on an iPhone, a full HD display that's 1920 by 1080, which gives it a PPI of 401. That's not the best in the world, but it's better than the iPhone 6, and which is about 326 PPI. So what it means is everything's really nice and sharp and crisp, and you can't see any pixels on the text, and everything looks beautiful from websites and messages and images to your Twitter feed or whatever you're doing on your phone. It all looks really nice, all looks really sharp. The colors are nice and white. And to demonstrate the colors, if I just reduce the brightness a bit here, if I bring in the Z3, this is the Sony phone. If I go to my Twitter on both phones, you can see, because it's a good demonstration of the whites, that the Z3 has a far cooler palette to it. The whites are almost bluish, whereas this has a nice natural, almost paper yellow. But that's natural. This is a much better quality display. But side by side, you can really see the difference. And actually, this looks yellow and this looks white put side by side. But undoubtedly, the iPhone does have a nicer display and is more accurate. One thing I'd mention is there is no Gorilla Glass or sapphire glass protection for the screen. And I do have a few friends who have iPhone 6s, and they have scratched them despite taking good care and putting cases around. This screen and this glass on the front is very easy to nick just with a key or something, but it's easy to scratch, and for something so expensive and so valuable, you're going to really have to be very careful with it. It's a shame that they haven't quite put that sapphire glass that they use on the lens to keep it scratch free on the front yet. And since most Android phones are on Gorilla Glass 3 or even Gorilla Glass 4 this year, it's a shame that we still haven't got quite the screen protection that we'd like that some of the competitors have. I can't fault how it looks. The display is beautiful, colors are great, it's bright. It's absolutely one of the best displays, if not the best display you can buy on a smartphone. And the addition of the full HD resolution just makes everything nicer and crisper. Another thing to note is that there's actually a oleophobic coating which stops fingerprints essentially. And now I don't know how well this will come out on the camera, but even in bright sunlight, it really does work quite well. You can see a little bit of smudging, but it's definitely not a fingerprint magnet. And for such a big, beautiful screen, it's quite nice to not have to continually polish it or clean it with your hand or something. So that coating actually works quite well, and it's something that I don't think they talk about much, but it ensures your screen, even though it can be damaged a bit more easily perhaps than other phones, stays pretty clean and pretty fingerprint free. So that's pretty good. Now let's talk a bit about the performance and storage of it. The 6 Plus comes in options of 16, 64 and 128 gigabyte storage. This is a 64 gigabyte model, which actually only has 55.5 gigabytes available. You can see the capacity there, 55.5. So even though this is the 64 gig model, actual available use is quite a bit lower at 55.5. And that's not a huge problem for the top two models, the 64 and the 128. But if you've gone for 16 gigabytes, you'll only get about 11 or 12 available. So it really isn't much, and is the main reason I really recommend getting at least the 64 gigabyte one. This has got plenty of room. I'm not worried about it. I can take all the pictures, all the video I want, download all the apps I need, and I've got a lot available to me. So that's just a recommendation to you that do avoid the 16 gigabyte model if you can. I know it does cost a bit more this, but it'll be worth it in the long term, I promise you. But under the hood we have Apple's 64-bit dual-core A8 processor. That's clocked at 1.4 gigahertz, and it has the M8 motion co-processor, which handles all the sensors and bits and pieces like that. So what that means is it's incredibly quick. Everything is nice and fast and fluid. You can take photos really nice and quickly. Apps load fast. The browser loads fast. Games run silky smooth. So I've run a few benchmarks for you. I won't run them again now because it takes too long, but if I just show you the screenshots I took of the results, you'll see that this actually comes out quite well. It achieved 47,782 in the Antutu benchmark. Now if we compare that against the Android Sony Z3, if we look at the Antutu benchmark again, you can see that this actually only scores 41,833. Now I know there's a big difference in hardware and software here. I mean, we've got a quad-core processor, we've got 3 gigs of RAM. This only has dual-core and 1 gig of RAM. So obviously software optimization and the operating system are a big contributor, and these are only synthetic benchmarks, so take it with a pinch of salt. But even though this is a flagship phone, the iPhone 6 Plus does take it to town a little bit. It's quite a lot faster. In use, these aren't really comparable, they're two different operating systems, but I just wanted to show you that in terms of performance, this is exceptional. It's really, really fast. And just to prove it to you, let's run a couple of games, because that's what you'll probably be testing it with. So I've got a few games here. Let's jump into Asphalt 8. And this would be a good chance to check out the speaker for the first time. Make sure that's not silent mode. There we go. Let's get a bit of volume. There we go. That all runs really nicely, really fast. Sure about my driving. But while I'm playing this, one thing that I will show you is that the speaker is here, and you can see how muffled it gets if you do place your finger over it. And unfortunately, being there, excuse my driving for a second, and to get a good grip on the phone, you're going to sort of often hold it like this. And I've often found myself covering it up. So perhaps you'd say, well, hold it the other way around, like that. But then it's here, and now you're holding it with this finger. So it's kind of annoying, actually. And it's one of those things where, in any position, you do accidentally occasionally hold it, and then you're noticing that it's muffled, and you think, oh, I've got to adjust my grip. And it would be nice perhaps if the speakers were on the front, or even if you had stereo speakers, one on the top, one at the bottom. It wouldn't be the end of the world if you only covered one like I'm doing there. But it's not hard to do to cover it, and it's just sort of one of those things where it's a shame given how everything else is so excellent. And you can hear the speakers are really good. It's really bassy, really punchy, and one of the best speakers you can get on a phone, perhaps except for the boom sound on the HTC, and even the Z3 stereo speakers are pretty good. But this has got a nice punch to it, and it's really nice just when you're not covering it, essentially. But anyway, let's jump into another game to show you. What should we go for? Let's have a bit of Goat Simulator. I know it's not the most demanding game, but it's a great game. I'm sure you'll agree. So let's jump into this. And you can see that the blacks are just, it's difficult to see where the bezel starts and the screen ends. The blacks are so nice and deep and inky. It really is a fantastic screen. So let's jump into Goatville here with my licking goat. There we go. And again, excellent music, right? So let's have a jump over here. But this is, and this must be 40, 50, 60 frames per second. It's really smooth, and it's just genuinely really nice to use to play games with it. I would actually prefer my iPhones to my Android phones for playing games. They're just a bit more reliable. Perhaps their frame rates are a little bit better, less likely to crash. So for gaming, it's really, really good. Let's just go on. There we go. Oh, it didn't blow up. I thought it was going to blow up. Let's go. There we go. Michael Bay. I think my goat's dead. Alright, so you can see that everything works fantastically well. That A8 processor is chugging along, and it's ensuring everything is silky smooth. And although it perhaps gets slightly warm, it's by no means hot on the back when you're running an intensive game. There's a bit of a warm up here, but that's because the rest of the metal is quite cold, I suppose. But that's not really anything to worry about, but I thought I'd mention it to you anyway. So there are no issues with overheating, just an ever so slight warming at the top there. But that's fine. So obviously this is the fastest iPhone you can buy. It's the most powerful, it's the most expensive. It's going to run everything well. If it's on the App Store, the app will run well on it. There's no problem at all. If you're looking for one of the best, fastest phones you can buy, although on paper Android phones are superior with their 3 gigs of RAM and octa-core processors, as we saw in that benchmark, the software optimizations and Apple iOS make all the difference. So this, I would probably go as far to say, is the fastest, maybe in terms of smoothness at least, phone you can buy. So really a good selling point for that. So let's talk about that camera. On the back we have 8 megapixels with a dual LED flash, and on the front we have 1.2 megapixels. But the proof is in the pudding, so let's just go straight in and look at some photos I've taken with this. They're not edited in any way, and they're just taken straight off the phone. So let's jump in with these nice pictures of trees. So first and foremost, one thing that does bother me slightly is the fact that it's the 4:3 ratio. This display is 16:9, my laptop is 16:9, my TV is 16:9. So having a 4:3 sensor and giving you this letterboxing either side is just a bit annoying. It just seems unnecessary. In the camera app, you're seeing the white either side. In the camera gallery, you're seeing the black either side. And it's just annoying that you don't really get a choice. I realize you can crop it afterwards to a 16:9 aspect ratio, but with most other Android phones, you can just perhaps lower the megapixel count, but get a 16:9 shot. And although it's not, a make or break issue, it's just one of those little niggly annoyances that I kind of see every time I open the gallery and have these big letterboxes on the side. But that's a minor issue. Let's just look at the photos, and you can see that they come out exceedingly well. There's bright backgrounds, dull foregrounds, but it all comes out quite crisp, quite clearly. It takes a picture of what essentially you're seeing, and that continues if you zoom in. The quality is still there. Perhaps the only current rival would be the Note 4 from Samsung, but this is definitely the best camera you can buy on an Apple product. And part of the reason for that is that this has what they call optical image stabilization. This isn't on the iPhone 6, it's exclusive to the 6 Plus, and it basically stabilizes your photos. It stabilizes the image a little bit so it becomes less blurry, more detail can be kept, and it just improves overall the quality of the camera. I'll pit the 6 and 6 Plus closely against each other in terms of camera on the comparison video, so we'll see what difference optical image stabilization does make. But for now, this is a great camera that produces some really fantastic video stills and video. Now, speaking of video, it's also really, really good. But interestingly, we have the option for 60 frames per second recording. If I go to settings and then scroll right down to, not that far, to photos and camera, and you'll see that there's an option here for record at 60 FPS. Now, that's pretty tucked away in the settings, so you may not even know about that, but you can get this option on the 6 and the 6 Plus. But if we keep that enabled for now, I'll show you the difference between them. If we go back to the gallery, and this first video of my local high street is in 30 frames per second. So it'll go pretty normal. Everything looks pretty good, as you'd expect, and the quality's nice. This is recorded in 60 frames per second. And everything has almost like a soap-like smoothness to it. It's definitely going to be a personal opinion. It's going to be subjective whether you prefer that or not. But you can see, if I play it again, that it's sort of a bit weird. It's not something you're quite used to at 60 frames per second. Obviously, play does take a bit more storage space when you're filming, but if you have a higher capacity model, that's not an issue. So that's going to be something that's going to be a personal choice. But just to let you know that that option is there, even though it's pretty well buried in that settings menu. So in addition to really great photos and really excellent videos, there's a couple of really interesting features that Apple do really, really well and better than any of the competitors. First is the slow motion. Now, I'm going to show you this on the phone as opposed to an overlay on the video you're watching, because there's a slight issue in that you can't export the slow motion film without losing the slow motion effect. You can do it, you can upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or Facebook and it will maintain the slow-mo, which is great, and that's probably what most people will do. But you can't plug this into your computer and then just take the file off and play it, because even though the data is still there, it just plays it as a normal video, and I think you have to use some other software to bring back the slow motion, essentially. So I'm going to show you this on the phone. So this is my cat, and you can see that I've changed where the slow motion starts and ends. I can adjust that like that, so I can make this first bit slow motion if I wanted, like that, which is pretty cool, and it looks great. But good lighting is so important. Indoors it is a bit grainy, it's a bit noisy, but if you can get the right light, then it really does produce some fantastic looking slow motion shots. So if I make the slow motion start when the cat, or the Chap cat, jumps on the bench, you'll see just how good this looks eventually. So this is 240 frames per second and still in HD as well, so that's pretty good. And this slow motion is way better than, in terms of quality, from my experience, than any other device. So it really is a standout feature of the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. The last time, there we go. There's just a million different things I'd like to film in slow motion. My brother said someone used an iPhone 6 in the pub, and at just the right point when someone threw a pint over someone else, he had that in slow motion. And I wish I had that video for you, but apparently seeing someone have a pint thrown in their face in slow motion is a sight to behold. So that's a really great feature of the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, and something that I found really interesting. Now, finally, there's a time lapse. Unfortunately, I haven't filmed anything particularly interesting for you, but just to give you an idea of how it works, if I move on here, I just place this down outside, facing upwards, and a typical British grey spring day is actually quite interesting that you can see the clouds pass like that. So this either shows perhaps time moving quickly, or if you were to film yourself, whatever you'd be doing would be a lot faster. So the time lapse and the slow motion really make the camera just a lot more interesting to use. You know, you can talk about megapixels and apertures and sensor sizes all day long, but if you want to use it, you know, with panorama pictures or the time lapse or the slow mo, which more people will want to use, and I'm sure you've seen enough YouTube videos that show the slow mo in much more interesting context, that it's a definite plus to have. It's a really cool feature. So that definitely stands out, and it's one of the reasons that I think the iPhone 6 Plus camera is one of the best, if not the best, camera you can buy on a smartphone. Now, finally on the camera, I'll have a quick mention of the front-facing selfie camera. Selfie being a word that I think I have to use these days. 1.2 megapixels. As I'm sure you know, megapixels aren't everything, so don't worry that the actual spec of the front camera isn't so good. It does take a pretty good picture. Now, I'm not one to take selfies particularly, but here's one I took of me the other evening. That's why it's purple, because it was a nice sunset. But it shows even in low light that there's good, crisp colours. Even in the corners, there's minimal noise. So I was actually quite impressed with the front-facing camera. So if a quality front-facing camera is something that's important to you, then I can't recommend it highly enough. It's really, really good, and a lot better than many other phones that even sport up to sort of 5 megapixel front cameras. So that's really good. Now, another selling point of the 6 Plus is its battery life, which is actually a lot better than even the iPhone 6. Inside, we have a 2,915 milliamp battery, and what that means is we get one of the best battery performers of any smartphone you can buy. So it's really, really good, but it's not quite the best. So I ran the Geekbench 3 battery benchmark on my Z3, which is famous for having one of the best battery lives of any sort of mainstream flagship phone. And I did the same on the 6 Plus. And if I show you the screenshots for the results, the Sony Xperia Z3 lasted for 6 hours and 12 minutes, scoring an excellent battery score of 34. Now, although that doesn't necessarily mean much to you, what it does do is provide an interesting comparison when I show you the 6 Plus results. So let's get this on. It's quite difficult to struggle to handle two large phones at the same time. Yeah, here we are. So as you can see, the 6 Plus didn't last quite as long, but the scores are both similarly excellent. So not quite class leading, but for an iPhone product, this is definitely the best one you can buy. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in the 6 versus 6 Plus comparison video about how much better this battery life is over the regular 6. But although, as you can see, the Z3 has lasted a little bit longer here, there's no doubt that the 6 Plus does have a really fantastic battery life. And this will last you a full 2 days of moderate use. You know, you're not going to have to worry about charging this all the time. I do charge my phones pretty much every night, but I would be pretty confident that I could use this all day, leave it at night, and then all day again, and it'll still have some charge left in it. So battery life, just like the display, just like the camera, just like pretty much everything we've talked about so far, is again excellent. I really can't fault it. Now, in terms of software, you've probably all used an iPhone before. This actually has the most recent iOS 8.2, which added the Apple Watch compatibility. So I won't go into too much detail about iOS 8. It's pretty straightforward, you can see. But as you'd expect with the A8 in the back, it's silky smooth, no problems at all. There's not a hint of lag or stutter, and that's probably thanks to the fairly lengthy animations between, you know, opening apps and doing bits and pieces. But it all works super smoothly. There's no hint of lag at all. Everything is really nice and fast, and it's pretty much the fastest iPhone you can buy. In general use, it's completely fluid, it's completely stutter free, but at the same time you could argue it's also getting a bit boring. The parallax effect you get on the background wallpapers adds sort of a hint of motion, but the lack of widgets or live apps does make it look a bit old and a bit boring, perhaps compared to Android and Windows phones. So iOS is still great for the vast majority of people, although just quickly I would quite like a search button within the settings. When I showed you that 60 FPS video recording option earlier, it was a little bit tucked away, a little bit buried in here, and it would be quite nice with this amount of options to have a bit of search button. It's a minor issue, but it's just one of those things that I found myself wanting to sort of go up here to look for a magnifying glass to search for something. And the one thing it still has over competing operating systems is, in my opinion, a better and more reliable app ecosystem. I'd rather play a game on my iPhone than my Android phone, but this is more of an issue of hardware and software fragmentation. But it means Apple software is often just a bit more stable and a bit more reliable, and for those who aren't quite as tech savvy, perhaps it's just a bit easier and a bit nicer to have a better grasp of how it all works. And also, if you do use other Apple products, from iPads to MacBooks and iMacs, etc., then there is a fair amount of interoperability between them. I think that's the right word. You can text from your laptop, etc. So I won't go into too much detail about every single feature of the latest iOS. I do want to just mention a couple, though. First of all, Siri is still present with a long hold of the home button and loves to talk to me and not tell me jokes and tell me about the meaning of life and bits and pieces like that. It's definitely more useful than Samsung's S Voice, but I would say it's not quite as useful as the Google Now voice equivalent. So I think it would be quite interesting in a future video to pit Windows Cortana, Android Google Voice, and Apple Siri against each other to see which one is better. But just on the face of it and from my own use, I prefer the Google on Android phones. But you can download a Google app to get that functionality, so you can actually still have that and Siri. But I found myself not really using Siri that much. So let's ask her a quick question. What's the meaning of life?
All evidence to date suggests it's chocolate.
Very funny. That's very good. One more iOS feature I would like to talk to you about quickly is the Health app. The Health was introduced in iOS 8, and it's a sort of dashboard of your health and fitness data. Although Health is available on any iOS 8 device, so it's not exclusive to the iPhone 6 or 6 Plus, it's still a great tool which offers functionality similar to other smartphones, including Samsung's S Health, which is actually pretty good in terms of measuring steps and calories, nutrition, sleep, and general fitness data. But I don't think we're quite yet seeing the full potential of the Health app. There's definitely more to come, although perhaps not just yet. Health has been made quite a bit more significant since Apple's March conference, which introduced Research Kit. In the near future, people will use their phones, perhaps if they have pre-diagnosed or long-term illnesses. They can keep tabs and collect data more quickly and more easily using new and not quite yet released medical research apps, which could offer genuine real-world benefits. This isn't an iPhone 6 Plus exclusive. Any iOS 8 device, and no doubt future updates will expand its functionality, can use it. But it's still a really interesting feature, and I think Health on the iPhone is one of those things that to keep an eye on. And I think we haven't quite seen yet just how important this will be. So that's pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what Apple do with this in the future. But for now, it's just a good step counter. It's a good calorie counter. And I like that it even tells you how many steps you've climbed in terms of flights. Call quality is excellent. I've phoned a number of people and they say they can hear me clearly, and I can hear them clearly through this top speaker up here. On my Z3 Sony phone, which I have been using, I actually found that the speakers weren't quite so good and the call quality was lacking a bit. People sounded a bit like a robot to me, but the voices are nice and natural here and it all sounds really good. So for a phone, you can't get better. And if you're paying 700 quid for a phone, then it better damn well work as a phone. I think you'd agree. Now I'd like to end with a few little tips and tricks that I've found in my use of it. First of all, the bundled card ejector, use it. Don't try and use a pin or anything else to try and open this. It doesn't work, and because the thing that comes in the box with it has a square end, and so therefore must lock in to a presumably square hole within this circle hole. So don't try and pry this open with anything other than that, because I tried to rather foolishly and it didn't work. So don't damage anything that way. So use what's bundled. Second of all, you can actually enable Siri to be able to open and talk to you from the phone being off, but it does have to be in a charging state. But let me show you how to enable that. If you go to Settings and go to General and then Siri, if you enable Allow Hey Siri, then I can't show you right now because I haven't got a charger, unfortunately, but this could be off. It can be, upside down, or this can be off, and then you could say Hey Siri and it will wake up and you can talk to it. So that's quite useful perhaps to check the time from if you're in bed or something, or make a quick text message while it's plugged in. So that's just a little tip for you. Also, now another quick tip is if you go to your photos and you say select one and you want to edit it, if you click edit at the top right, you can change its brightness and color and exposure and bits and pieces, and add some filters. But interestingly, if you do add something or you do change it, perhaps I've add this filter like this, you can see then that if you press a finger down and hold it, you revert back to the original. So that's a quick way of sort of seeing whether you prefer your edits or whether you want to keep it original. So I think that's quite cool, and not everyone knows about that. Another thing is if you swipe down from the top, you get the notification panel. I'm sure you've seen this before with your stocks or your notifications or emails and bits and pieces like that. But if you scroll down, you can actually edit what comes up. So if you press this, you can remove or add different apps to show you different notifications from that menu. So that's quite useful. Perhaps you're not interested in stocks at all, so you can remove that, and then you get a lot more useful notification feed for yourself. So you can personalize it a little bit. So swipe down and press edit to change those. Now finally, on iOS 8, Apple actually has now allowed you to add third-party keyboards if you weren't a original fan of the Apple keyboard, which I actually do like. And another thing, just quickly, with the iPhone 6 Plus is in horizontal mode, you get extra functionality to the Apple keyboard. They've used the extra space to add some sort of cut, paste, and back and forward, and a few accents and bits of punctuation. So whether you want to use it like that, I'm not sure. That doesn't fit quite nicely for me. I prefer texting in portrait mode, but it's nice to see that with the first-party keyboard, they've added a little bit of extra functionality there for you in landscape mode. But if you're not a fan of the Apple keyboard, you can add other ones. And I think two of the most popular third-party keyboards are SwiftKey and Swipe. So if I were to go to SwiftKey, you just download that. I have already downloaded it. And once you have downloaded it, if you go to Settings, General, scroll down, Keyboard again, and then you can add New Keyboard, and you'll see that your downloaded third-party keyboard will go there. So in my opinion, the iPhone 6 Plus is actually tied with the Galaxy Note 4 for the best large-screen smartphone you can buy. There's a lot of pros and cons between the two of them, but for the iPhone 6 Plus, its design, its build quality, its premium finish, its reliability, simplicity, excellent camera, really good battery life, all things that make this a highly recommendable phone. So if you're looking for a great camera, then this really is the one to look out for. Are there issues with it? Well, yes, no phone is perfect. The couple of little niggly things, the camera protrudes and it's very slippery to hold. You're going to feel like you drop it. But both these are very quickly fixed with just putting a case on it. And although obviously that takes away from the design aesthetic, adds a bit of extra weight and bulk to it, for something this expensive, you're going to want to do that. And it does fix those two issues. So if you're asking yourself, what's the best large screen phone for you? Well, it would be between this and the Note 4. Although this actually has only 5.5 inches, actually the LG G3 also has 5.5 inches, so you could argue that's a closer comparison. I think we're looking at definite phablet territory now, especially with the slightly bigger bezels and the weight. So the Note 4 and the iPhone 6 Plus probably go head to head here. And I don't know which way to go. I suppose it all comes down to you. Honestly, they're both great devices. Check out my Note 4 review for a deeper look at that. But I don't know, it's difficult. It's up to you, whichever app ecosystem you're more integrated in. Perhaps if you have an iPad or a MacBook or an iMac, then you're probably going to want to opt for this because you're used to the apps, you're used to how it works. And software is something that, as we discussed, although Apple perhaps they're getting a little bit boring, perhaps there's not quite the innovation we'd quite like, it's reliable. The apps are there, everything works smoothly, and you know it's going to work every time. There are far fewer crashes than there are on Android phones, even with significantly more powerful devices. So it just shows that software optimization really is the key, and it means that the iPhone 6 Plus is a fantastic device. Now, if you're on the fence between the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus, then don't worry, I'm working on a video which will put the two much more closely together. We'll look at them side by side, use them side by side, and get a really close, in-depth look for a really detailed comparison. So look out for that. But in the meantime, if you can afford it, buy it. It's a fantastic phone and I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope this review's been helpful for you. Please check out my other videos, and if you do enjoy watching my content, then please like and subscribe. It makes all the difference, and it means I can continue buying really expensive pieces of kit to come and show you in detail. So thanks for watching, guys. Cheers, everyone.